Good morning, everyone. My name is Narayana. Uh, Working for People's Bank. And can we have some responses about the audio and visual technology? Are you happy? Can you all hear me properly?
Yes, sir.
Good morning, sir. Yeah.
Good morning. Okay. Right. At any given point, you can interrupt me because I like any interruptions. Because as you know that this is totally a dumb kind of a session because I don't see anyone, and also there is no life in this kind of a session. And frankly, this particular topic or rather subject cannot be done online. That is my perception and also experience. In this course, we have at least 13 sessions, and that covers very basic concepts of commercial and commercial banking, commercial lending, and project financing. And I'll give you a lot of materials to read and evaluation methodologies that semester and exam carries 70% of your 100. And also I'll take you through a session at the last day, which is a Excel spreadsheet working session that you have to carry a laptop and come to the IBSL to do it with me personally. And there we will do all projections, cash flows, and calculation of IRR, NPV, DSCR, and also a sort of a sensitivity analysis. So that kind of stuff cannot be done online. That's not possible at all. And also my experience says that during the working capital calculations, the people wanted me personally. And halfway down, I had to stop the online session and get together and did it, of course. And I believe at least for 5, 6, or rather at least for 4 sessions, you should come and meet me in person in IBSL. Otherwise, this is not a productive session at all because this is a real practical subject. In your banks, you have to do practically. And I know within the crowd, you may be a officer who is not in the credit department or in the credit department. Whatever it is, if you want to enhance your knowledge, you should ask questions from me. And also, I will take you through certain case studies during session. So ideally, if you like, of course, you can coordinate with Kalinga and tell me exactly. Even from next week, I personally love to come to a IBSL and do the sessions rather than online because hardly any life in the no energy at all. Even today, I will do some sessions, but do the session, but there's no energy at all. That I have to tell you in advance. Okay. Ideally, we should come in person and do these sessions interactively. You can interrupt me today at any given point. As I told you, your semester exam carries 70%, and also once you do the spreadsheet exercise with me on the final day, whether you do it or not, of course, once you carry the laptop and sit with me, that you will get 10%, 10 marks. And based on that, I will give you an assignment, which is the project, what you call. And once you do the statistics that you need to convert into a project appraisal report with hypothetical names and stories, and I will give you this framework of calculations, and then you have to manipulate that and come up with a new story. That is the assignment. Unless this is practically done, of course, there is no value in this particular course. And also, I will be talking about the latest updates and latest revisions, and especially with regard to NPL management. The recently number 13 of 2021 circular was issued, and it has been adopted in banks since January 1st of this year. So you should be familiar with them as well. And whatever the latest stuff and about moratoriums, restructuring, and rehabilitations, uh, and both project financing and both project financing and commercial lending will be discussed in detail. But ideally, we should come together and meet together. So then only that we can discuss in whole. So today's session is I'll be giving all these sessions, and frankly, that I had some personal issues, so that I was not 100% involved, and even last week lecture I had to cancel. Um, Even today, with a lot of difficulties, only I'm doing this one. Whatever it is, if I can meet you in person, of course, that will be great. Please coordinate with Carling and tell him whether you like to come over there and do it person. Right. Today's topic is concepts of project financing. Let's try to understand what they are like. Okay. What is a project rather than a business? Now, if you take a business, of course, you know that typically you have sales, you have cost of sales, then you have expenses, and finally you come up with some profits. So ideally, whether you have assets or not, business is that which generates cash. Business is something that generate cash. Project not necessarily. Project not necessarily. Before I go to the definition, let me tell you: if you put your house, if you construct your own house, it is not going to generate any income. So that itself is a project because it is a unique venture which you have not experienced yet, and then which carries certain amount of cost, and there's a timing that you need to complete it. And finally, if you are not happy with the house that you have built, finally it is not a project. That means quality. Uh, Even your marriage, or rather wedding, is a project. You see that more than anything, more than the girl that you are going to marry, of course, you have enough cost involved in it, and you are very busy with the schedules. And to improve the quality of the wedding, that there are so many stuff that you bring in, but are they the one that you really require? Is the question that you need to ask. Because in any project, final expectation is the outcome, not the outcome. Now, if you want to put up a house, what is the outcome? What should be the outcome? That you want to live in peace in that house. If you marry with a girl or a boy, what is the outcome? Outcome is the marriage. But your function is the wedding, but finally you need to end up with marriage. Marriage is a long life. I mean, that's very, very, what do you call it? That is how you appreciate it. It all depends. When it comes to projects, there are large projects, and probably that might earn something even. When it comes to a large project, either the outcome should be social, economic, okay, and sometimes it's spiritual. Now, if you say a Buddha statue doesn't make any sense of income, of course there are ways of earning income, but uh, it's not social. But then again, it's spiritual. There's no economy in it. There's no social aspect in it, but it is spiritual. The people have some outcome of it, but it is a project, unique venture. And the Buddha statue, which is going to be replicated somewhere else, even which is not the same one. There are at least some minor changes. So that is why you call that it is unique venture. Unique in the sense that is unmatchable with something else. This is the only one that is something like that. But there are mostly replicable or repeatable ones, but there are changes in it. Okay. Project is a unique venture with beginning and end. Now, the example that I told you has a start and also an end. If you take up a huge building, let's say Twin Towers or the Lotus Tower, ideally there is a start and end. And this is very important for us as bankers because you know that we need to structure the financing accordingly. During the construction period, there is no income, so that we probably give them a grace period, hardly any income. So, but unfortunately in Sri Lanka in project financing, promoters need to pay the interest during the grace period. I can understand how they pay it because no income at all. So in Sri Lanka, the project's financing is only for people who have some sort of a current income. That's very bad because ideally during the period of grace, not only the capital component but also the interest should be built into the later installments, not at the very beginning. And this grace period might extend even 2 years. Generally, typically in banks, 2 years. Is there a bank who gives 3 years grace period for project financing? Your experiences? Give me a second. Somebody's calling. Hello. Oh. Oh. ठीक है next week ये बताया Hello. Laban सुबह बताया Oh. Sorry about that. Any experiences with grace period of 3 years? I hope that there are bankers in the crowd, okay? No? My experience is the only 2 years basically, even in my bank also, unless it is a very unique one. But practically, even if you take the Alta building, how many years that they have taken? Supposing if a bank has financed them, most probably about close to 5 years, I think, 5, 6 years, which has not properly started the commercial operations. So this timing is very important for bankers. You need to project the time taken to complete the project because otherwise our intention is to recover the money that we have lent, no? But how we can recover it? Only from the commercial operations, so that we need to know exactly the day that they are going to start the commercial operations. Then only we can recover money. The other one is a cost factor because in project financing, you know that every project has a element of cost. The cost estimation is a crucial factor because which is subject to variations. These variations coming as a result of cost overruns as well as the time overruns. Cost overruns may be associated with some of the factors of inflation even. Inflation really eats nowadays. You know, the people who are doing projects are in terrible troubles. The simple example is that foreign exchange. Now, someone wants to import. Now, one of our clients, of course, he wanted to buy some tiles for an apartment project which is almost to be completed, and the tile supplier here in local has said it takes about 9 months to complete the order. How can you wait about 9 months to get the tiles only? So finally he had to fly to Dubai and make an order and to get them quickly. Now in this process, if you go to a bank nowadays, they don't open LCs. Why no foreign exchange in banks? I don't know whether your bank has foreign exchange. My bank doesn't have foreign exchange. Why? It is exhausted. Like I mean that every day there are a large amount of buying requirements of foreign currencies from various customers. In our case, including the government. Now the government is openly says no, there is no foreign exchange to purchase oil. Okay, that's not a secret across the board. So how can a customer complete the project given these situations? Cost, because of the cost increases as a result of time overruns. Even if you delay the schedule, timing at least one day, that will really cost a lot. Now, the classic example here in Sri Lanka is the Port City project. The moment the previous government came into power, they stopped the project without knowing all these principles. What happened? It's an utter loss of cost overrun. And finally, they restarted it. Then why did? Now, when you take that decision before you stop it, of course, you need to think of a lot, especially with regard to a large project. A day might cost a lot. They might cost. And also look at the impact. The particular project was opened by the president of the China, and you can imagine the power of that, whether you like it or not. And a country like China will never let it down. Once they start something, of course, you could see across the country, across the world even, when they start something, they do it. They do it. You need to understand these parameters, especially when you do a project. And quality also very important, because end of the day, if your expectations are not met with the final product, what is the purpose of doing a project? The quality matters, especially with the large projects, because initially what you see a prototype or a diagram or design, 3D picture. Even when I built my house, of course, the house that I am in right now, I was given a 3D picture, but finally, when you look at the final product, it is not that. But fortunately, in my case, my final product, the physical product, is better than the picture. So that's the kind of achievement that you should getting into the completion of the project. You should ensure for that to come up to that level. You need to work hard, very work with the designers, because during the project operations there are a lot of changes taking place, because this is a unique one. This is not a prototype which has been seen. Even if you have a prototype, of course, when it come and try to locate in a particular place, depending on the location parameters, wind speeds, and then again the lightings and everything, of course, you may come up with some of the changes. The moment you make a change, cost cost is involved. So when you look at these parameters, cost, schedule, and time, the quality, they are interdependent. It has got interrelationships. So when you do any project, forget all these construction projects, buying a machinery, installing a plant. Okay, I'm talking about business sense. Buying a vehicle itself, and then again putting up a new project, building. And when it comes to large projects in Sri Lanka, like toll roads, harbors, irrigation projects, water projects, mining projects, all these are unique projects. There are enough and enough hindering factors when you go along with the product projects. Okay. Um, you get different scales, of course. Probably your house. Now, if you lend money to a customer to put up a house, maybe about 5 million, it is a very small project. But when you expose to a project like couple of billion rupees, you get enough and enough exposure about project financing. So that my humble appeal is, unless you go out to the ground, okay, unless you practically exposed what is project financing, you will never ever learn this subject. That is 100%, 200%, 300% guaranteed. All what I say is, I'm telling from my experiences of financing projects. They are not sometimes large scale projects, but the largest ever project that I have undertaken is about 10 billion, where we funded, it was about 6 billion project. We funded about 3.5 billion, and it's completed right now. And the project now, its value about 10 billion. That is the funny side of project financing, because the project that you see from right now maybe a bare land, couple of materials, but when you add value to the project and finally when you see the final product, of course, it's amazing. That's entrepreneurship, That's entrepreneurship. And also at the same time, you have seen half-hearted buildings across the country, wherever you go. Like පන්සල්වල අතර භාගයට හදා තියෙන. ඇයි ඒ පන්සල්වල භාගයට හැදෙන්නේ? ඒවා project financing නෙමෙයි. project orientation එකක් ඒක ඇතුලේ නැහැ. ආම්දුරන්ට ඕන වෙලාවට සල්ලි තියෙන වෙලාවට දායකයන්ට ඕන වෙලාවට ගල් ගෙඩි 10ක් ගල්ලා හදාලා ඔහොම තමයි යන්නේ. ප්‍රොජෙක්ට් ඔරියන්ටේෂන් එක අර පන්සල් වල තියෙන ප්‍රොජෙක්ට්ස් වල නැහැ. සල්ලි නැහැනේ එකපාර. So co-sponsors are not available straightforward. But sometimes I have seen some people donate the entire thing. In my temple, of course, there was a statue. Entire statue was built by the same person. No, nobody else. So he has a curiosity to complete the project and donate it. So that he has that project finance, project kind of definition. Okay. So depending on the scale, of course, the gravities, the parameters, and involvement totally different, and financing tools are totally different. Any interruptions and anything that you want to change during my discussions, because there are some disturbances coming from outside as well. Anything you want to, please tell me, because I'm really not happy because I don't hear from you. Anything? Hello, are you there with me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Right. Projects in financing. Now, earlier what I discussed was a project. The example that I discussed, your wedding, your first baby, second baby, because first and the second babies are totally unique, no? And buying a vehicle, putting up your house, and then again lending to a customer to build their house, and toll projects, so business projects, whatever you call. Okay, right. In financing, it's long-term infrastructure. It's maybe industrial or maybe public. Now, as a state banker, I'm working for People's Bank. We need to give financing to the government also. Like we have granted to CPC, Colombo Petroleum Corporation for projects, and then to Electricity Board, very important, and then Urban Development Authority for road developments and all. They are large projects, very large projects, and when you take an irrigation project or a road project, it has got a long life. Why say I infinite, not infinite, finite project, finite life, finite tenor? Because it guarantees only a certain period of time. Even if you put up a large building, there is a hidden guaranteed period, maybe about 100 years, but still it is finite, not infinite. You know that there had been constructions or the houses which are built in long years ago. Now, if there is a house which is more than 100 years, you call that as a heritage bungalow. No? Heritage bungalow. People love to preserve it rather than demolishing it. Even in Colombo, you may have seen couple of projects like that, couple of assets like that. They are not going to demolish it. They remodernize and present it back again. Um, there's a hidden value in it. Okay. And a lot of projects, harbors, airports, and large buildings here in Colombo, large companies, factories, production facilities. It has got a long life. Otherwise, um, you don't need project financing. And it may be an standalone entity. We call that SPV, special purpose vehicle. Ideally, the project financing should go into a independent or a separated. We call that off balance sheet items, ideally. But there are small projects like within the context of the balance sheet, also you finance like to buy a vehicle, it is a project. And to put up a building in the same premises, it is a project. Until you complete the project construction, it is a project. And allow them to put up a new plant, it's a standalone entity. That's a project. So working capital financing is not project financing, but when it comes to SPV, like special purpose vehicle, entirely new branded, brand new project, may be part of that working capital financing, but ideally it is not working capital for investment only. Then few diversification opportunities. Let's say that for an example, John Keels wants to put up another factory. It's a diversification. When it comes to diversification, there are two ways of looking at it. One is the related diversification, and the other one is the unrelated diversification. You may have studied under management. What is related diversification? Which is more or less a branch of the business that you are in right now. But unrelated diversification is all about the total new project, which has no kind of a connection between the current operations. Why we need to talk about unrelated diversification? Because this is quite dangerous unless the customer does understand the whole concept. You may have come across some of the proposals which are coming from your clients to put up a new factory. Please be careful. If he doesn't have any experiences in the new business, that might lead to failures, which has happened to me in many occasions. But mostly related diversification is ideally. I know that there is a customer who has done a restaurant and he wanted to put up a service apartment, quite related. It's more or less a service orientation. And then he went into a put up a large chain of restaurants with a banquet hall. They are related diversification. You can start with tour management operation, related diversifications. But the same fellow who goes and uh, put up a hospital, entirely a different unrelated diversification. These projects are having operating margins. When it comes to operating margins, they should be high operating margins because otherwise you can't recover the loan money that you have invested in it because this money is going to be huge. Now, if you just look at the Lotus Tower, Nelum Pokuna. Nelum Pokuna again theatre. Or a tower in Lotus Tower. Uh, Very unfortunately, even every morning that I am going in front of it, of course, I I I I feel now it is open because I have seen some foreigners come and take pictures in front of it. They have no ways to go inside and see the entire city. Ideally, that should have been open and operated because there are margins. The moment that more you close it up, of course, more you lose it because you have incurred a loss. Right now, you loss is the investment in it, and then you don't do it. If you do it, only that you can come up with some free cash flows. In the sense, once you recover the money. Now, let me clarify it with an example that I have here in my house. My rooftop is with solar power panels. I have a panel uh, with a capacity of 10 kilowatts. You know that 10 kilowatts, when you have a 10 kilowatt structure, you can calculate the worst scenario income generation per month. Like if you take 24 hours, if someone is interested, you can write it down. You can take the worst scenario only 18% of it. That means at any given point and in any given day, you can expect the maximum 4.3 hours only per day. But there are chances, of course, it increases when the sun is very shiny. And 4.32 into 20 rupees per kilowatt hour. Right now, the electricity board paying you. And then into number of kilowatts. In my case, I have got 10 kilowatts. So per day, I generate 950 rupees worth of electricity, worst case. And multiplied with 30 days, so easily I can earn about 28,000 rupees per month. 28,000 rupees per month. Okay. And then you can net it off like, I mean, that I have a importation of electricity from the grid. It all depends how many units that I consume here over here. Let's say that bill is about 5,000 rupees. So minus 5,000. So you get a net cash flow of 23,512 net cash flow. It is not a free cash flow. Net cash flow of 23,512. So with that, I should be able to pay my loan. Okay. Now the investment cost me about 1.7 million for 10 megawatts. And then you can work it out with the net cash flow. There is a time where you can recover the whole money that you call the payback period. Okay. Of course, you can incorporate with the discounted facility and work out the entire net present value of the project, IRR as well. And then after a certain period of time, that means that you recover the money, the entire money that is coming from the project is free. Okay. But there's an agreement with the CEB. I think they pay only 22 rupees per kilowatt only up to 7 years. Thereafter, it reduces up to 15 years. Even in that case, I don't mind because by the time I have recovered my investment, so that entire money that is coming to me is free cash. That's the beauty of projects. And it becomes a passive invoice. And without your involvement, this money is coming. So I know that there's a customer, millions of money is coming as a result of putting up all his proof. I mean, that he has got factories. So that's the beauty. Now, this is something that you need to encourage your customers to go for what do you call solar projects on their roof, because roof is there anyway, no? Convert into a solar project. Anyway, the government is having a fantastic objective by 2030. Uh, the entire out of entire electricity generated in the country, 70% will be coming from the renewable energy. That means solar, wind, biomass, biogas, hydro. And the current issue is we are totally depending on thermal power because there had not been any kind of a fashionable kind of objective goal from the government side. Now, this present government is that present government is a present government. The president has a very clear intention to cover and convert the entire country into renewable energy, and that's the passion, or rather that's the pattern in the other part of that as well, because we have enough solar power, renewable sources are available, and because of that. But the problem is when you of your house, a customer comes and want to borrow money to put up his house. It's possible because if you just look at his salary, which is the cash flow, and probably you can extend the loan for 25 years even. That is why you extend it up to 25 years, because currently he can't pay such a big installment. When you give him a loan, of course, probably you recover the capital in the early stages so that you are also better off. But then again, for the customer, the moment that you delay the payment, the time value of money, when you take the time value of money, the installment value is becoming uh, inferior, depreciated. Though it is, let's say for an example, today the installment comes to about 25,000, but after 2 3 years, 25,000 is nothing, because on the other hand, his salary also increased. So out of his entire salary, 25,000 is nothing after a couple of years. Okay, but when it comes to large projects, this is what is yeah we are struggling as a country. Mm, we need large amount of equity investments. Now, if you just look at the apartment buildings pop up in Colombo city are mostly funded by equity, not by the uh, finance banks. If it was like 75% of the project was financed by the banks, that would have been a crisis. Like during the pandemic, there was an issue, but right now there's a huge demand for apartments, simply because you know there is no kind of interest in saving money in a bank. Ideally, you should invest in real assets, not in financial assets. Then, අපේ equation එකක් තියෙනවනේ. This is the problem that I don't have a code. I should have explained you very clearly. Savings equal to investments කියලානේ. ඉතුරුම් සමානයි ආයෝජන කියලා. ඉතුරුම් කියන්නේ මොනවද? Financial assets. What are financial assets? Maybe savings account, fixed deposits, treasury bills, treasury bonds, loan, shares, loans you invest in financial. Those are financial assets, uh, which brings you some return. And against the real assets. What are real assets? Land and building, plant and machinery, vehicles, even debtors and stocks. And also real asset, real estate. Real estate in the sense වතු පිටි ගොඩනැගිලි දේවල්. දැන් මිනිස්සු වැඩි හරියක් ඉන්වෙස්ට් කරන්නේ ඒවැ. බැංකුවක දාන එකේ නෙමෙයි. බැංකුවක දාපුවාම තියෙන වාසිය තමයි the return is low, but you can take the money back again at any given point. But when you invest in a real asset, real estate rather, real asset or real estate, there is no liquidity in it. Liquidity is very low. So you need to focus on how to repay, pay back my investment, and thereafter free cash. But when it comes to large project, what has happened is there are a lot of sponsors, people who could invest in projects. So they come with large amount of investment, but they have conditions. What are the conditions? I need the operations. I need the operations because they know the beauty of income. So there are terms like build, own, operate, or build, own, and transfer even. And there is another word called build, own, operate, and transfer. Boot. Build, own, operate, and transfer. So that's the agreement with the Hambantara port. Only problem is 99 years. So that was a condition, like I mean, that they took the advantage of the problem that we had. Even right now, probably the government, right now, the present government may have to invite a lot of other investors to come and take it over and do it, and later you transfer it. Because right now we have a crisis of not having foreign exchange. The moment that money comes in as foreign exchange, the beauty is that one way that we our reserves build up, at least for a short period of time. But the projects are coming up now. If you take the port city, we couldn't have done it, of course, without the help of China. Why? We don't have money, we don't have the technology even. So we need collaborations with some other countries. These collaborations are not free. Of course, way back in history, of course, our Bandaranaike Memorial Hall was gifted by the Chinese government. In today's era, no more gift. Even the TV stations, Japanese donation. No more donations now. All is business. So business is coming in different versions, and I'm expecting this government also come up with. They also every day you can see some fights are going on, strikes are going on. Other terminal like the Nepal, because these are different terminologies which are exist in operation right now. Otherwise, what happens? Then you need to be a rich country. You don't depend any of the foreign exchange for a direct investment. You need to. We are not a country like that. We have a fundamental error. What is the fundamental error? We are not export-driven country. Always we were depending on services, remittances. That's truly bad. Okay, that is truly bad. Tourism is not a good job business. You could see it, no, because of the pandemic hit, it was zero. Now only it is picking up like that's not a possible proposition. The ideal way of developing a country is export-oriented projects. At any given point, export should continue. Like gas, oil, you see that they need it, and food. This is the only way that we can promote food and beverage because we have enough sources over here. Maybe the scale may be not like large, but still that we can still. So you need mega projects to do that. Even agriculture has to be mega projects, not small projects. ඔය කහවා වනවා වගේ වගා කරලා හරියන්නේ නැහැ. හැබැයි government has an intention, if you don't know a lot, of course. Government has given very clearly instructions to all AGS to identify the cultivable lands and demarcate them and make sure the deeds are ready and give it to BOI or somebody else to promote investments, maybe local or foreign. That is where your banking involvement, if it is an agriculture project, now you call that agribusiness right now because they are in massive scales. Maybe corn, maize, or whatever. We doesn't cultivate here. Everything is possible because our soil conditions are very good. What matters is irrigation. There should be a system of getting water into the project, provided there's a possibility of doing big projects here in Sri Lanka. Any questions so far? Nanda Prashna. No questions? Okay, project finance. क्या प्रति मूल्य ने? Uh, Project is a unique venture, so that you take that as a special purpose vehicle. It's a brand new project. Yeah, it is a new balance sheet. When you take a new balance sheet, you have two columns. One is the asset column, the other one is the liability column. On the asset column, what you find is basically land and building, vehicles, machinery, plant, things like that. If you take a hydropower project, land, a small building for the powerhouse, and mostly the machinery. You have the uh, construction. Weir is there blocking the stream and taking the water into a different canal. You call that headrest canal, and then collect into a tank. You call that four-bay tank. From there on, you pressure it through a pipe. Okay, and then it comes to a point where uh, water flows through a propeller and which is called the turbine and generate power and connect to the grid. Mm, it's basically no variable cost, of course. As long as water is there in the stream, of course, you have the cash. Cash is almost there. It's a special purpose vehicle. It's a different balance sheet. So on the balance sheet, you find land, probably all other lease lands, and then again the machinery, mostly, and a small building. That's it. No stocks, no debtors. Debtors are there because the electricity board doesn't pay on time. There's a delay. No. So on the liability side, if the promoter has borrowed money, so you have a big loan and plus the equity. You should not mix up, and you should not allow customers also to mix it up. Nowadays, sometimes I have seen that low sole proprietorship partnerships are not really admirable because you need to separate from other businesses when it comes to projects. And also there is another element of project financing within the context of the given balance sheet. Now, if they want to put up a new building in the same premises, it is the building financing is component is a project financing component. If they want to put up a plant, it is project financing. Okay, so that is why project financing requires a project report from the customer. So project appraisal is done by the banker, but you need the customer to come up with a project report. Why you need a project report? Now, when it comes to a large project like solar, maybe, and nowadays the rooftop solar, the project proposal is coming from the vendors. It is a very small one. It is not a very comprehensive one. But when it comes to a ground-mounted solar park, ground-mounted solar park කියන්නේ බීම හයි කරලා තියෙන 1 megawatt above ඒවා සාමාන්‍යයෙන්. පොඩි ඒවා ගන්න නැහැ දැන්. 2-3 megawatts. It requires a project report because there are a lot of other approvals annexed with that. Okay, electricity board has a kind of an environmental authority has to give some consent, and then sustainable authority is the sole authority to initiate it. They are required. Their approvals are required. These people come before the banker comes, of course, and they do a lot of other investments in inspections, and they will give their concurrences or approvals or whatever you call. And the electricity board is very specifically looking at the connectivity of whatever. Okay, and for a project, of course, you need to look at the capacity of generating electricity. I mean, that is there a very clear sun in it? And when it comes to a wind power project, of course, very bad because you need to check at least 6 months the generating capacity of wind from that particular area because you are not going to put up wind powers everywhere. You can't do it. Their ideal locations right now, you know that Kalpiti area and Mana you find, and also Punarin area you find, and Hambantota area there were a couple of, I am not sure what has happened to them, of course. That's very beautiful project because even during the night time also it rotates. Solar what has happened only during the daytime. Nighttime it does not generate it. So you take that as a special purpose vehicle created by sponsors. Sponsors are the entrepreneurs using equity and mezzanine debts. What are mezzanine debts? Are the long-term debts. Sometimes the mezzanine debts are like debentures, for an example. Debenture is a mezzanine debt. Sometimes which carries two characteristics, debt characteristics and the equity characteristics. Supposing, because debenture is not like a loan. You don't, sometimes subordinated debentures are there, and sometimes what do you call redeemable debentures are there. Sometimes you find that convertible debentures are there. Supposing now projects, there are chances of failures because, as I told you earlier on, it's a unique venture. You never know what's going to happen. Supposing if there is a failure in the project, of course, what happens is there should be an exit strategy for the promoters. Promoters, no way, of course, their equity may go into AY, but mezzanine debts can be converted into shares. Okay. And then the lenders, that is debts, pure debts, coming as loans. And everybody is looking at the cash flows. Now, when I put my solar project, what I looked at the cash flow. Why should I look at something else? Because I had 1.7 million in my hand. Okay. For which I took a loan of 1 million. I put only 750, not that I had 1.7 million, sorry, that I had only 750,000 rupees. I took a loan of 1 million at the rate of 4% because at that time there was a scheme. We were the people also to handle it. So before it expires, of course, I took it. And many people we invited, and that might be repeated again, and that is, we have some discussions. I'm not sure about the road rate. Earlier it was about 8% and it came down to 6%. Finally, it was only 4%. Just to promote this. Okay. On the other side, of course, you get 20 rupees per unit kilowatt hour. Fantastic. So at that time, I was for that is not the income, that's cash flow. What is my net cash flow? Because there is a cash out, cash in. What is cash out? When I consume my electricity in house, of course, there's cash out. Okay. When I earn out of my solar generation, cash in. So out of the net cash flow only, I thought of paying my loan. So when I looked at that, of course, the installment came to about, I think, 27,000 or 28,000 because I did not want to prolong it for years and years. I took a loan of 3 years. So after 3 years, all my cash flows are free. Remember that, okay? But I have invested about 750,000 plus the loan. So today, my loan is paid like nothing because I don't have to worry. From the net cash flow, it is paid off. So cash flow is very important. In business, cash flow is very important. And your debt service recovery, and debt service DSE, debt service repayment capacity is calculated not from the sales, not from the profit. That is from the cash flow. That's the primary source of reimbursement or loan repayment. We don't look at other income. Don't in project financing, don't look at other income. That is otherwise that is not project financing. Now, when you want to put up a hotel loan, okay, when you want to lend to a hotelier, look at the cash flow coming from the hotel. Don't look at his other income. දැන් ඔය පොඩි මිනිසුන්ට ලෝන් දෙන්න ගියාම OT එහෙම බලන්නේ. OT බලලා ලෝන් දීලා හරියන්නේ නැහැ. OT කියන එක permanent case එකක් නෙමෙයි. ඔය during the pandemic OT ත් නෙමෙයි base salary එකත් අඩු වුණා 150කට විතර. ඒක කොහොමද අර මොන්සේ ලෝන් ගෙවන්නේ? බෑනේ. එහෙම බෑ කරන්නේ. ඒක අමාරුයි. You may, but in project financing you can't do it. Okay. But we take collateral. I will discuss that one in detail later on, of course. Collateral is the second way out in the sense, in the case of project failures. And you might sell it to somebody else and recover it. But remember, half paid out. Like for an example, ideal case is like a building or whatever it is, of course. If it is half paid out, if it is defaulted, then how are you going to sell them? Probably very difficult. You may, but very difficult. So that the burning period of a project is the construction. Until they start the commercial operation, there is a huge burning period. You boiled up because so this is where that you disbursement, this is where you have to be very serious about the disbursement of the loan, and you are not going to disburse the entire loan at once, in stages. Okay. So this is the definition of project financing. Let's repeat that again. Project financing is the structured financing of a specific economic entity. When it's an economic entity, always think that it generates income. special purpose vehicle, a brand new balance sheet, simple terms, also known as the project company created by sponsors, equity holders. When I say sponsors in time to come, of course, think they are the shareholders or the promoters. Promoters, sponsors, shareholders are almost same. Using equity and mezzanine debts, and for which the lender considers cash flow as being the primary source of loan repayment. Whereas assets represent only collateral. Collateral in the sense the second way out, physical objects. And we don't look at the assets. I don't. No, our practice in most of the branch managers, the first question is what is your security, and they are struggling to find out the security value, for sale value of the project, and of which this is how we are. These are silly questions that you need to ask because under IFRS even security is not a matter for loan classification. Security is only the second way out. Okay, for loan NPL classification and also for impairment, what is matters? Cash flow, cash flow, cash flow, cash flow. So you should have a passion of looking at the cash flows, and you should understand these terminologies even. And then the project financing. Let's look at some of the theories are there in an article in an article in the Harvard Business Review. You know what is Harvard Business Review? Okay, somebody has defined project finance as financing of a major independent capital investment that the sponsoring company has segregated from its assets and general purpose obligations because that project goes as a SPV or balance sheet item. How does the current balance sheet and the off balance sheet item get connected? In the current balance sheet, it reflects as an investment. Fixed assets at the investment. A new balance sheet equity. Okay. A major player in sponsoring infrastructure projects and providing financing in developing countries. The World Bank defines the project financing as the use of non-recourse or limited recourse financing. Oh, there is something that I need to discuss with you. Before that, I would like to have a cup of plain tea and come back again. What about you? It is 9:25. Okay, let's take about 15 minutes break and come back. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, sir.
Right. Welcome back. Can you all hear me? Hello.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Right. In an article, it says the World Bank definition because why we take World Bank. If you go to World Bank site or ADB site, you get a lot of information about these projects because they are very much related with the project financing. Even in our country also, because if you take government projects are funded by World Bank funds and ADB funds largely. Okay. The World Bank defines project financing as the use of non-recourse or limited recourse financing. Further defines these two terms. The financing of a project is said to be non-recourse when lenders are repaid only from the cash flow generated by the project or the event of complete failure from the value of the project assets. Lenders may also have limited recourses to the asset. This is not resources, recourse to the assets of a parent company sponsoring project. These two definitions are along with the historical examples above begin to establish the characteristics of project finance in building a more robust picture of project finance. It's useful to articulate the full list of characteristics and contrast project finance with the corporate finance. I'll come to corporate finance later. What is recourse meaning in general terms? Recourse is something like sources of help as in a difficult situation. Recourse. You recourse to something that you are asking some help. So when it comes to recourse, in the sense, basically you can take that as collateral even, but mostly the projects are non-recourse in the sense no collateral given. Now, if you take an example, a hydropower project, because these hydropower projects are in jungles mostly, because there has to be a stream, and nearby the stream only this project is built. And then again, the machinery, which is metal stuff, and then the small powerhouse. But if you take the physical values of this project, of course, hardly anything for the loan that you have granted to recover in case it fails at the very beginning. Okay, but supposing that is called non-recourse almost. Only thing, the way out is recovery of money from the project assets, because um, when you want to recover money from the sale of project assets like the land and building, which doesn't carry that much of a large value, but to put up the project, you could have incurred such a large amount of money. But finally, when it perishes as a result of non-failure or other failure of implementing, hardly any value. That is called non-recourse. Non-recourse. And even if you take a classic example of toll road is owned by the government. You can't take the mortgages of the roads. That's not possible. And but you might lend still because the toll money is a free cash flow almost. So based on that, you can depend. If you take a harbor, are you going to auction the harbor? You may, but no buyers at all. And even if you take a kind of airport, more or less the same. But they are non-recourse financing. But in our country, especially your experience is that you might ask for no, we need the collateral of project promoters. That's called full recourse. If a project is fully covered with almost tangible things, that's called full recourse. But there are chances where that you can go to limited recourses in the sense that in case of a project failure, you may have coupled with director's guarantees. Okay, director's personal guarantees. In project financing, you don't ask other guarantors because hardly any way of taking other additional guarantors. But in a project financing, that you have a SPAV, special purpose vehicle, brand new balance sheet. In it, there are directors, and you can take guarantee of the directors. But in that case, you can seize the properties owned by the guarantors. Okay, that is called limited recourse, but it may not be sufficient enough to recover the money that you have granted. So that's called limited recourse. But I know we did couple of projects, but what happened was that we didn't have an understanding of what is this recourse matters. Of course, we said the customer we need some additional security, something else. So that was full recourse. But in a way, that's not project financing per se, I would say. That's not project financing. Project financing is purely go by the non-recourse base and totally depend upon the cash flows. So that is where you need a thorough understanding about the project and the capacity of generating cash from the project. So if you are into project financing, you should have a huge capacity to visualize the project cash flows. So visualization is translated into parameters and assumptions. That is based on assumptions. Upakalpana mata tamai godak projections wenne. So that you have to come up with assumptions and don't depend upon the details given by or rather provided by the promoters. And in a classic example, in the recent time, there was a project of annual income was about 2.5 billion, where the cost of sales is about 1.9 billion. When I looked at the material supply, it was about a vegetable and fruits processing company. And I what I do is I go into the reality, like I mean, that the sponsor was there, an accountant was there, and it was cost of sales was 1.9 billion. But I did a simple calculation divided by let's say 360, and every day they need about 5.2 million worth of material supply. So I asked him, given the price of 1 kilo is so much, and given the scarcity of raw materials, And have you got the capacity of putting in so much of value worth of inputs per day? And where are the vehicles? How we are going to source them? Whether there are any cultivation available? Then when they started thinking of the reality of the project cash flows. Because until such time you give it to somebody accountant, he come up with some numbers and then you present it to the banker. Don't take them as granted for any reason. Go into the details and inquire. Probably if you are not happy with the numbers, of course you can discount it and see that this is what I think. And based upon that, try to calculate the DSCR. And if there is no debt service cover ratio acceptable to the bank, you need to decline at the initial stages. Don't come up with some bluff numbers. Get them to come up with some real numbers. What happened was they never came to me. Of course, the project was not initiated. You can't have a fancy picture and take the bankers. That's not possible, right? So project financing is not that easy, as I explained you. Mostly they are non-recourse based. Sometimes it may be limited recourse basis. And in Sri Lanka, why the project financing is not happening is one of the reason is this. I will explain you further. Any questions so far? So it says there are some key characteristics. What are these characteristics? Financing long-term infrastructure and industrial projects using debt and equity that I explained. Debt is typically repaid using cash flows generated from the operations of the project, which I also explained. Limited recourse to project sponsors. In certain cases, we when we take up a project, of course, ideally we take the guarantees of directors to cover up in certain cases. Debt is typically secured by project assets, including revenue producing contracts. First priority on the project cash flow is given to the lender so that we don't get ourselves subordinated because of that. Of course, we say every time you may have seen that the money should come to our account. Like for an example, if I take a simple example, when I borrowed money from the bank for my solar project, the electricity payment has to come to my account and they block that amount even. Okay, consent of the lender is required to disperse any surplus cash flows to the project sponsors. And high risk projects may require the surety guarantee of the project sponsors. And some of the projects which are coming from the government is guaranteed by the government. So that is coming as treasury guarantee. CBSL doesn't make any guarantees. Of course, they give you only credit guarantees. Credit guarantees only for poor customers, small customers. But large amount of guarantees, those are which we call the sovereign guarantees coming only from the government. And government doesn't give any guarantees for private projects. They will give only their sovereign guarantee for government projects. There are a lot of instances where the government surety or other government guarantee or other treasury guarantee has given away for many of the projects. Okay, so that's high valued collateral. You don't need any tangible collateral. So with that you can work it out. Hopefully that you understood. Hopefully, okay. So far about project financing, and then let's discuss what is corporate financing. That's an area of financing the entire balance sheet. How? So that if I say simply, now when you say project financing, we do talk about the debt financing from our side, of course, mezzanine financing or some other grants or matching grants or whatever that I will discuss later on. But when it comes to corporate financing, that you have to take a helicopter view for the entire company as an owner, as an rather lender. Okay, corporate financing guy is the one who structure the entire requirement of the balance sheet. So it is the area of finance dealing with the sources of funding and the capital structure of the corporations and the actions that managers take in to increase the value of the firm's shareholders, as well as the tools and analysis used by allocating fund resources. Now, as a banker, what we are worried is debt recovery and now interest. But as a corporate financer, you need to look at the shareholders' wealth and how best that I can increase the shareholders' wealth. Where that you will look at the weighted average cost of funds rather than the cost of debts. Cost of debt is only one source of financing, whereas when it comes to corporate financing, you will look at weighted average cost of funds. How best that I can structure a deal, how much money that the equity should be, how much money should the banker, and how much money should come from the grants, or how much money should come from the mezzanine debts, and how much should get from the suppliers. So that's a combination. You may have seen treasuries are there in big corporates, like if you take um, John Keels, they have a treasury division, and these guys are very busy with that kind of a structure. But treasury doesn't have the capacity. Treasury is an in-house department in the particular company. But the corporate finance is basically out. So as a result of that, these guys are more or less from the venture capital companies, merchant banks, okay, or investment banks. Today, you talk about these guys coming from investment banks rather than banks. Banks are primarily looking at um, debt component. We don't go into equity financing. We are more interested. Yeah, I would say more. We are only interested in debt financing, not more. Only interested in debt financing. But the corporate financer is interested in the whole structure of the deal. So that is why the typical role of an investment banker is to evaluate the company's financial needs. It is not only investment financing, but also the working capital financing, and raise the appropriate type of capital that best fits those needs. When he say appropriate, that he might talk to different banks. He might talk to venture capital companies. He might talk to other institutional investors to invest in this particular company. And he might talk to the government to get some free funds even. Okay. And they might talk to the suppliers to get credit to supply raw materials or whatever it is, and they might talk to the international suppliers to get some deferred payments. That's the role of corporate finance, and corporate finance may be associated with transaction with capital raise rate. So in Sri Lanka, investment bankers are not basically looking at working capital financing, but they will structure the deal. But mostly, they would love to see the equity and long-term debt structuring as an investment banker. Supposing one day if you want to be an investment banker, your role has to be into that area. So what we do is corporate banking or wholesale banking. So the corporate banking is basically defined into lending to the debts lending to corporates in terms of debts. So we might, as corporate bankers, either you say wholesale bankers, we go into debt financing for two purposes. One is to investment, other one is the working capital. So that you can see investment bankers are more like to shares and long-term debts, whereas the corporate bankers are more into investment and working capital. Okay, hopefully that you can segregate these things, and also they might get some financial supply chain optimization also can happen with the cash management, term loans, working capital loans, commercial mortgages are just some of the examples. And apart from that, I would like to add one more thing, which is called the development financing. Development finance, or rather, what is development finance? The financing into development of the country. Okay, development finance is related with the development of a country. But development has to come from various departments. One is the industrial development. Okay, number one is the industrial development. Number two is the, in most of the countries, agriculture development, because agriculture is the base cause of any development. If you just look at across the countries, right across the countries, of course, you can see even US, China, India, Japan, Vietnam, Thailand, Pakistan primarily focus on commercial agriculture. Primarily focus on commercial agriculture, which is a good business. Never ending business at all, because you need food, you need to eat, you need to consume. Okay, so agriculture development is very important part of development, and the other one is housing development. Okay, country requires the basic structure, the basic stuff, country. And the other development is import-export development. Okay, as a result of this development requirement per se for a country, development finance subject is created. To do that, of course, there are development banks. Okay, of course, let me start with development multilateral banks. They are like World Bank, ADB, Asia Infrastructure and Investment Bank, and then right now I'm dealing with one of the bank called AFD, which is coming from France. Okay, and they are either international banks or multilateral banks. Okay, and then these banks are primarily focused on development finance per se. And since they can't invest as a direct financer to individual projects, what do they is basically they get all of financial institutions and get them to do the financing into small tickets. That is what we call the refinancing. Okay, so basically concessional financing for the purpose of development. SME development is a big thing that we do talk about. You know, since last year, there was an order came from central bank, that is order number 1 of 2021. All the banks are supposed to increase their volume of lending to SMEs, which is SMEs, at least by 20% on year-on-year basis. 20% on year-on-year. This is a very challenging task. Especially it is very challenging for the people who have a large amount of portfolio. Small portfolio maybe you can manage, but when it comes to large amount of portfolio, increase by 20% is very, very crucial. Okay. But to do that, of course, you need development banks. And the beauty of development bank is there is something a very energetic guy in the development bank. You call that appraisal officers. Okay, credit appraisal officers who could visualize the entire project for a longer tenure. That's the beauty of a very good credit appraisal officer. We also had a couple of development banks in Sri Lanka. One is the DFCC, the other one is the NDB. Give me a second. Sorry, since you don't speak to me, I love to speak to somebody else to bring some energy. So please speak if you have any questions so far. Um, so I was talking about development banks. Now we had about a couple of development banks. They also converted into commercial banks for some reason, I don't know. And apart from that, there are small development banks like RDB, Sunset Development. But what I'm talking is big development banks too, because the key is the credit appraisal officer who could visualize a project. So ideally, if you just look at countries like China, India, even Japan and US, they have 4 types of development banks. One is the Industrial Development Bank. Number 2 is the Agriculture Development Bank. Number 3 is the Housing Development Banks. Number 4 is the Exim Bank. That's related to Import-Export Bank. Even in Thailand, they're really crazy fellows and they really trouble us. What they try to do is their exports into our country. So for us, it is imports. That's the role of Exim banks. Now you can see why our country is not developed. For some reason, years back, these beautiful 2 banks for development was killed by someone. Don't ask me who is that. Uh, I know the person who killed it, not a local one, a foreign one, who killed it with a purpose. Now, in countries, they don't want to see any ceasefire. They would love to see the wars in country because that is business. Likewise, they don't want to see any development in these countries. What happens is if there is any development, they have no business. They love to see all these people are poor. So then only they have a role to play. So likewise, these are matters to be concerned across the countries, across the world. So we need development banks. How best that we are ready is the question. So far we haven't been able to develop a development bank. And so as a result of that, we as commercial banks are undertaking the development role as well. So in the absence of development banks in our country, this concessional funding is coming through 2 departments from the government. One is the Ministry of Finance. In it, there is a department called Department of Development Finance. They only arrange all these refinance, interest subsidy loans, and the credit guarantee schemes. And department. They only arrange all this concessional lending. So the purpose is to develop the country in the absence of development banks. The question is, the answer is not that. Answer is you need to create independent development banks. Of course, I can remember sometimes back a government created SME bank also something, and then it was converted to another bank, and it was merged with the RVP finally. That was a failure because government should not influence with this kind of a development bank. Let it go like the NDB and DFCC structure. But unfortunately, it was stopped for some reason. So now you could see different types of financing: project financing, corporate banking, development financing. Now mostly our banks are into retail financing to individuals. Even if you take my bank, primarily we are a retail bank. If you look at my portfolios, large amount of money is lent to individuals, not to the business. That's the crazy part of it. Okay, so banks should drive their businesses into what do you call projects. But unfortunately, what has happened? If you just look at the registration in our country, I think they have only private companies, little more than 100,000 private companies, out of which about less than 5,000 other public companies. All the other little more than is private limited liabilities. Now you can imagine out of 22 million population, the amount of commercial operations. There are other various sole proprietorships and the partnerships. No count has been taken since 2013. 2013 or 11 was the last industrial census done in our country. Thereafter, there is no proper census has been conducted. These are weaknesses because no statistics. So we don't know what's happening primarily in a country like this. So in the absence of these things, of course, very difficult to develop a country. Any questions so far? Hello. Any questions? At least for fun. You can ask me any question, not personal questions, please. Do you all understand what I say?
Yes, sir.
Hello. No sound at all. Okay.
Sir, we didn't get the tute.
Yes. I was very busy, and I was not. It was almost about to cancel the today's lecture. Even I'll be posting all these things. Don't worry. Everything will be given more than this. There are a lot of other materials to be distributed among yourself. I was not ready basically for the lecture series. That is what happened. We will throw you everything. And after this lecture, I will email to Kalinga and he will disseminate. Any other questions? Subject related questions.
So I have heard that two development banks were killed by someone, and we don't have a development bank. In your word, actually, from you, I got it from earlier course. Then my question is, why don't you pass this message to the responsible authorities to have a development bank, strong development banks to develop our project development?
If you read uh, the policy framework of the government, it's in the agenda. It's there. But it is not happening. That is the question. So it is understood by the authority. They know it very well. If you type in Google, YouTube, The one who told that story is the Professor Nicholas Howard. I can remember. So you might see the video clip even how he said about this killing of two development banks. I don't want to praise that one, but you can read it, of course. He explains very clearly why it was killed. So if the government has a real intention, I'm a very small man to articulate all these things, but it is understood by the government. If you read the Saubhagya Dakma, it's there. And they know it thoroughly, then the need of Exim Bank in our country, the need of a development bank. Ideally, you should have three development banks: Agriculture Development Bank, Industrial Development Bank, and the housing. Let's forget about housing development banks. At least there are a couple of housing development banks now. At least the industrial development banks and the agriculture development banks. Because what has happened to this is very poor situation in our country. If a sponsor is going to a bank, bank officers are not competent at all. I can guarantee this one. Except a few banks, because there is no special dedicated uh, purpose vehicle in the bank itself. No experts except a couple of banks. I think commercial bank has a separate department, project financing. HNB, I think there are engineers deployed. Apart from that, I have not heard about. Even in my bank, we don't have a separate department. That's crucial. Yeah. Hope that
Why
I answered
private?
you.
So, what are the reasons to not develop private sector development bank in Sri Lanka?
Okay, that's perhaps a very good question. Why the development banks are not created from the private sector is number one, because when you have a development bank, you should have sources of fund for development and in the long term. Now today what has happened is all our commercial bank are short-term borrowing and long-term lending. So obviously what happens is, so as a result of that, what has happened is our business model is current business model is we have a huge pool of asset liabilities from retail deposits and then distributed among various types of tenors, like starting from 1 year, 5 year, and maximum 10 years. Only a small portfolio is given for housing loans like 25 years. So there is a matching issue here. So unless the development banks have sources of funds, unless the development banks have sources of funds for long-term matching, they can't do it. So that is number one. Number two, for me, the expertise. To develop project financing expertise is a big challenge because from theory you can't do it. You should have the practical exposure to do the project financing. So to do that, you should have enough projects in our country. Now, once I participated in a training program in India in IBA. At that time, I was the only international student in that crowd. I was clueless. But these guys from various parts of geographically in India are talking about big projects, whereas we don't have such big projects. They were talking about mining, coal projects, toll projects, and funded by banks. So what happens is when you have large projects, an expertise is automatically developed. Even today, if you develop a private development bank, the biggest challenge is how best that you find expertise. Now you today are talking about bankers, they are just bank employees. I'm so sorry to say, I am an examiner in the IBSL. I know the quality of the answers that I see in some of the papers. So sad. Either we don't teach that subject properly, and largely more than that, what I feel is the students don't have the appetite to learn in such a way. Now, this session cannot be done online. That's not possible at all. I don't have the energy to do it. I need the board. I need the case studies distributed among yourself and discuss. Because you have heard about Harvard University, Cambridge University. Why do they produce good graduates? Because if you go to Harvard University by chance, You have to complete at least 400 big case studies to be a graduate in Harvard University. That's crazy. Here, what has happened? We give you an assignment, you just copy from here and there and submit and get the scores and get a certification. Your intention is, I'm not blaming you, by the way, entire structure. Everybody's intention is to get a certification. What is the use of having a certification if you don't know how to do a job? Competency is not there in our country. So the reasons: number one, funding issue; number two, competence issue; number three, lack of projects in our country. So when you say lack of projects, the way forward is getting more and more projects. So ideally, if somebody has to develop a project, rather development bank, and get these people to be exposed in other part of the world. Now, for an example, I have participated in international training sessions. They are very good, short courses, but in my life, of course, I happens to participate in a program conducted by Harvard International, but they came here. That happened in 1995, the moment that I joined with the bank, and that was sponsored by the NDB, DFCC, and Central Bank, because at that time they were the development banks. They knew the beauty of it. The project, the course was uh, project financing and risk analysis, and you won't believe, you know that how they did the program? Every morning after lunch, theoretical lessons, and thereafter we were put it into a computer lab in 1994, 1995, and we haven't seen any laptops even. We had only desktop, and there was an Indian team came down here to train us Excel, how to manipulate the Excel spreads. Okay, entirely it was on cash flow basis, and we were given bulky assignments to complete and do the presentations. That kind of expertise. Thereafter, I have never seen a training program in such a way. Even I went to Thailand for a short course. It was a master class only for 3 days. They don't do it comprehensively. That was a 3 weeks program conducted by Harvard International. So the expertise is elsewhere. So we need to bring it down here and do that. Of course, the bank also should be encouraged to do it. Right now, the commercial banks are not doing it, and the expertise that I see in commercial banks also very lacking. That's my answer.
Correct, sir.
Any other questions? I'll be using that knowledge that I got it from Harvard International at the last session, because I still can remember the number of books that have been distributed among ourselves and the case studies that we did. Because I had a phobia before I go in the program, and I got all of a friend, and I practice several times how to do a case study, because you need to work on the spreadsheets. Okay. Now, when I do the same thing with some young generation, I am a very old man, but I see how they find it difficult to do a spreadsheet analysis. Very pathetic. Okay. So thanks for questions, and you can keep on asking me any questions. Now let's look at project financing versus security-oriented financing. Now, ours, let's look at the column on security. Security. Now, when you say security, security is how best that you can recover the money. No? Okay. And when you say security, I will explain it with kind of a presentation and also with details. Number one, security is the cash flow. Number two, others. Number one, cash flow. Number two, others. These others can be divided into two. One is the obligations, like guarantees. There is a series of guarantees, no person guarantees, corporate guarantees, government guarantees, credit guarantees, and then bank guarantees, things like that. Okay, when you take other assets, other securities, now one branch is guarantees, obligations. The other branch is collateral. Collateral are the physical stuff. Okay, that can be either movable or immovable. Okay, if I had a board, I could have branched it out and show you exactly. So in project orientation, always number one is cash flow. But security orientation, I would say the commercial credit goes with the security orientation. Client orientation. client ගේ මුණ දිහා බලලා security එක බලලා loans දෙන එක තමයි commercial loans කියලා කියන්නේ. Maybe about working capital financing, things like that. Okay, but in project financing we don't look at we do sponsors their credentials but more into the project. Okay, purpose development of infrastructure, enterprises and industries. Security orientation is basically whatever the security that you take and give away for working capital trading. Great. Development oriented project orientation has to come with the lower rates of interest. That is one of the issues that development banks initiatives, because you need low cost funds for longer tenors. It's very difficult to source them, but there are agencies across the world. Nowadays we are working with AFD to come up with a climate change fund, which is a concessional lending. And of course we had a deal with AIIB, which is Asia Infrastructure and Investment Bank in China. We borrowed at that's for working capital, by the way. That's a COVID-oriented fund, basically. AIIB not into corporate working capital, but because of COVID issue, they funded about 100 million to us for the 90 million US dollars, and that we are lending at 5.5%. It's like hot cake. Okay, these are concessional rates. But security-oriented, you don't have to give it concessional rate because they are buying and selling more into. When you say you don't have that much of entrepreneurship, that much of risk is there, so that we have to go with the commercial rates. Commercial rates start with AWPLR plus 2.5%, 3%, 3.5%. Sometimes fixed rates are like 15 to 16%. By the way, that rates might increase as well because their policy rates have been changed to 6.5 to 7.5. Okay, you must be knowing that one. So definitely in time to come, the rates might increase again. That's given because the inflation is rocketed out. Okay. Tenure, the repayment period is like long and medium. Commercial orientation is basically short term. Risk is very high because they are unique projects. You never know what time that's going to be failed. Give me a second. This is the problem when you work from home. There are many other sorry about the disturbance. Then the risks, high and moderate and low. Of course, commercial lending is not that high. Risk analysis is very difficult. Industry and project and client and everything has to be. And we will have a different segment of risk analysis. This is where you need to come up with I told you that I went through a program with international Harvard International. They use the Monte Carlo simulation, which never used in our country. For which, of course, you need a Monte Carlo simulation risk analysis package software. And to do that, of course, you need to develop pragmatic cash flows. But at least we don't do sensitivity analysis. But in our course, we will do a sensitivity analysis. At least to do a break-even point, calculation is not happening. The only thing that we do is the risk rating in all banks. Risk rating is a man-made one, basically, and which is not based on a scientific method like the credit scoring. Because the credit scoring is based upon the regression analysis, whereas risk rating is based on expert opinion. Weightages are developed through expert opinion. That may not be right. Different banks have different risk rating models. Disbursement of the loan, projects need basis, and commercial orientation. He says that he need money to buy the stuff. But project basis, of course, we did a project of, I told you, 3.5 billion worth of loan. I had to visit there 8 times. 8 times. When I did my house, I visited here 72 times. That's my own project. Okay. I had a client and who did the construction. It was given like a turnkey operation. The site was handed over to the contractor, and it was not owned by me during that period, but I was supervising, and it was a period of 1 year and 3 months, during which I had visited 72 times. Every time I took photographs and I have a file for which. Okay, follow-up is very important, as I told you before, during, and we will discuss all these things. Recovery, follow-up, restructure. A lot of You know that recent development in the banking industry is that even central bank has given some instructions to the banks to develop a rehabilitation unit. I'll share my experiences when it comes to that presentation, because Bank of Ceylon and ourselves, we have developed a project rehabilitation unit, and probably we may the only people who have developed a policy statement for which, and we did with a very much effort. I have a team of people uh, who did that, and rehabilitation is something very unique right now. This popped up as a result of the COVID issue, I think. The COVID issue prompted us to rethink our lending strategies. One thing is the rehabilitation. If you ask me the difference between resettlement and rehabilitation, under a rehabilitation proposal that we might look at financial and non-financial help. Okay, that's called the uh, financial restructuring and strategic restructuring. Both things are happening, and the bank might infuse some fresh debts to take it over from there on. But in commercial lending, we are not going to do the rehabilitation. What we will do is we will recover the money from the collateral. I think this is a very clear segregation. Under security orientation, I would say it's commercial credit, and project orientation is basically development financing and project financing. So now by this time you should have some idea of what's happening in project financing, what is the difference between retail banking and what is the difference between project financing, uh, and then commercial financing. Okay, right. So this is another aspect of understanding the project financing, risk versus return. Now, if you decompose the return on equity, this is how you can read it. Return on asset multiplied by financial leverage. Now, mm, how do I show you? Now, if you write the definition or the formula for return on equity, that is profit after tax divided by equity into 100%. Okay, that can be decomposed. How you decompose return on asset into financial leverage. Return on asset क्या है? Profit after tax divided by total assets into 100, and financial leverage is not a percentage. Total assets divided by equity. Now, when you write mm, profit after tax divided by total assets, and when you write financial leverage total assets divided by equity, you can cut total assets to total assets so that you end up only with uh, profit after tax divided by equity. So that's the equation for return on equity. Return on equity is what? Profit after tax divided by equity. Right. So in business, what happens is hopefully you can see this my slides, I believe. Can you?
Yes, we can.
Now, when you move into a business, what you see in a business is this. As bankers, we should be able to look at from a balance sheet perspective. You could see physically the land and building, plant and machines, tools and equipment, vehicles, things like that. And also you can see the current assets, work in progress. Debtors, you can see the books, cash balance, you can see. All that can be seen physically. What you can't see is the liability side. Okay, how much the shareholder has funded, what are the long-term debts, but you can verify it, but you can see them. And creditors, accruals. This is the typical structure of a balance sheet. But in this case, you can see the equity is very small. So financial leverage is total assets divided by shareholders' funds. Okay, at a point that you might say it is high risk or low risk. How do you say? When you say, let's go for some examples. Say, let's say you have a balance sheet with assets of 100 million. Balance sheet A is 100 million. Equity is only 25. So which is equivalent to 4 times. If you don't follow me, tell me. Yeah, I will repeat that again. So total assets is 100 million, equity is 25 million. So the financial leverage is 4 times. Then the company B, total assets 100, equity is 50. The answer is 2. So 2 times. Okay. There is another company C, 100 divided by 75. Okay. Answer is 1.3 times. Okay. So this 4, 2 and 1.3 reflects the contribution coming from the shareholders. So at a point you should be able to say which one is high leverage, which one is low leverage. Can somebody tell me which one is high leverage? And for you, of course, I will help you. The B is equally leverage. 50 given by the shareholders, 50 given by the debt. Got it? Yeah. And can someone tell me who is high leverage, who is low leverage? AO. Now we have two answers only, either A or C. Any answers?
A the answer.
Yeah, sure. A is the high leverage. Holders have put on 25 million, the debt holders have put 75 million. So from 2 onwards, whatever number that you get is going to be high leverage. But below 2 is low leverage. And sometimes you can see a balance sheet which is totally funded by the shareholders. Let's say D, 100 divided by 100. So which equals to 1. In the sense, no leverage. Okay. So entire money has been funded by the shareholders. So, but most of the times you see balance sheets beyond A even. And sometimes you may have seen 100 divided by 10. The leverage is 10 times. So they are very highly leveraged. Highly leveraged. Okay. Why I say highly leveraged? Simply because of the money contribution or something else? The question is, this is just a balance sheet. How that has been funded. Shareholders and the others. Others may come from bank loans, leases, and the advances. And also I want to explain you the difference between loans and advances. Ideally, I again and again ask you, why don't we arrange a physical class, because it's very difficult to explain everything like this. I don't have a passion of explaining like this. That is the main reason. There are many people who are adapted to online lecturing, but not me. And this is also after refusing so many times. Not that I'm boasting, but that's my passion. Okay. Now you need to look at the income statement. For bankers, the most important, okay, what is the most important out of this words that you see? What's the most important word? There are words like sales, cost of sales, gross profit, admin expenses, marketing expenses, financial expenses, gross profit, other income, net profit.
Net profit.
Any other answers, please? I heard there are about 50 odd people in the crowd.
Sales.
Exactly. The sales is the more crucial word. Because the moment sales drops, what happens? Obviously, every other thing is going to get dropped. But except something like the fixed cost. What are they? Admin expenses, marketing expenses, financial expenses. But ideally, you should go to the cash flow because when you take financial expenses over here, that reflects only the interest component of it. As an entrepreneur, he should understand for the P&L, only the interest is charged, but they have to pay the loan. Ne? They have to pay the loan. Let me, for fun, I'll give you an example, or rather, for a small assignment. Let's say there is a loan borrowed from somebody else. Let's say 100,000. Okay. The moment he borrows 100,000, supposing it is a business, what is the double entry from his books? I believe that you have done accounting. In his books, what is the double entry? Not in our books.
Cash in hand credit, debit, and the borrow is credit. The lender is credit, yes.
Okay, bank loan is credit, cash book is debited.
Debit.
Okay, right, good. Then every month he has to pay a capital installment of 10,000 rupees, a very short term loan. And let's say the interest component is 2,000 rupees. So the total is 12,000, which you call the installment, loan installment. Okay, then can you tell me the double entries from his books for payment of 12,000 from cash or whatever? If the question is not understood, please tell me.
Cash account is credit.
By
That liability, the loan account is debited, credited, debited.
you need to elaborate it clearly with the numbers. Somebody else, please. What I feel is only two, three people are talking.
12,000 credit, 10,000 debit to the loan account, and 2,000 for the expenses,
What expenses?
interest expenses.
Yeah, it comes under financial expenses. Yeah. So the money goes out of the cash book, 12,000. Okay. So net profits carries only the 2,000. The entire money has to be paid out of cash. Always remember to think from the customer's book. Then only you see the gravity of it. Now, this marketing expenses was probably admin expenses. What is the killing expenses? Expense for an entrepreneur under admin expenses? Killing expense. Under admin expenses. I can elaborate it. When I elaborate what happens, you know the answer. But I want from your personal experiences. What is the killing expense which comes under admin expenses? This is credit, if you want to learn.
Fixed overheads like rent.
No,
Depreciation.
no, it is not a cash flow even. Anyway, thanks for answering. I love wrong answers. Then only everybody understand it.
Advertising.
No, I mean that. Sorry.
Manufacturing.
No, I'm not talking about the cost of sales. I'm talking about fixed expenses, either admin expenses, marketing expenses. Now, what I want, the term is either in admin, marketing, or financial expenses. What I'm asking is, what is the killing expense of one of these things? One of the details of detail expenses. If you are going to give a loan, remember when you work out the DSCR, remember to look at this number. What's it? That is salaries. Whether the customer like it or not, or entrepreneur like it or not, the salaries need to be paid. If not, what happens? They will curse. Every customer is worried about the payment of salaries. There is a particular date, they can't delay by a minute, because these people who are working only for money, no, mostly the employees, their only dream is to get the salary, most, not the career. Yeah, if you look at a factory, a lot of them are workers, laborers. They need money. If the entrepreneur is not able to pay the salaries, then what happens? That's the end of his business. Now he can delay the financial expenses. He can delay the depreciation, not a financial expense even. It's not a cash outflow. Marketing even you can get some deferred payments. You can delay the financial expenses. You don't know how many times they delay it, but you can delay the salaries. That is why I told you it is a killing expense. Remember, whether there is sales or not, some of these expenses are need to be paid off. Those are called fixed cost. Okay. If they have taken a loan, they have to pay it. But imagine if the sales drops, what happens? They will not be able to pay them because the gross profit is going to be very thin. And obviously, the amount of money which earns as gross profit has to recover or rather cover up all the other expenses. Now, this is the stress area where the sales are there. Sales are going to be the stress area. Okay. Now, my explanation is, supposing if someone has borrowed heavily as term loans and advance, what happens is that monthly commitment is very heavy. Okay. That's when the financial leverage is very high. When there's a moment where there's a sales drop, he will be in trouble. That is what is called risk. So I wanted to explain that one. Look at always from a practical sense when you lend to a large conglomerate. Because when you lend large amount of money, the installment is going to be heavy. In fact, like in India, we have a practice of creating a debt service reserve account. What I say is have a bucket of debt money, which is equivalent for 3 months installments, and keep it aside, a reserve account. Because there are instances where this customer is unable to pay on a particular date. So the manager is empowered to take some amount of money from the bucket and recover the loan. And this bucket can be filled when the sales are good. And there are certain periods where the sales are not good. So that's called the debt service reserve account. You can put that as a covenant in your loan proposals. I do it, of course, in our bank. And I got it from India. It's like very cherry picking. I got it from India because in India, debt service reserve account is very popular covenant. Okay. Any questions? Now you should be able to understand when the financial leverage is high, the risk of lending. Okay. Right. Now this return on asset can be further decomposed. How? Return on asset can be further decomposed into two branches. One is the profitability. I am writing in a small book what to do. Into asset turnover or asset utilization. If profitability is the net profit ratio. That means profit after tax divided by sales into 100. And asset turnover is sales divided by total assets. The financial leverage is total assets divided by equity. So if you cut into sales and TA to TA, so you end up back again, PAT divided by equity. That's the financial leverage. So ultimately, if you decompose the entire financial leverage, that is how further you can decompose if you want. So this is called the DuPont analysis, by the way. Yeah? This is DuPont analysis. If you Google DuPont analysis, bank has a different DuPont analysis, which was developed in 1972 by David Cole. But the DuPont analysis that I am talking is the general DuPont analysis across any business. So you have three components of return on equity. One is the net profit ratio. The other one is the sales asset turnover ratio. Other one is the financial leverage ratio. If you really look at in a business, from a business perspective, the most important component of this equation is what? You have three components: profitability ratio, asset turnover ratio, financial leverage. What is the most important if you want to lend to a company? What's the most?
Profitability ratio.
Any other answers? The most important component, yes.
Financial leverage ratio.
Financial leverage.
No, asset turnover. How many times the assets have been converted into sales? That is business. Financial leverage is a reflection of the risk. Profitability ratio is the reflection of business. It is just a reflection. But what you do in a business is reflected through the asset turnover. Business is all about turning assets into sales. How many times the assets have been converted into sales? Okay. Ideally, you should not have any assets. Then only sales. Fantastic. No assets, no borrowings. Think of a man who is fish vendor. Morning he buys an amount of fish and go and sell it and close the business. Nothing. No risk at all. But these big entrepreneurs, what they have done, they have borrowed money. Okay, they have assets. During the COVID period, what happens? Big hotels closed down. There's a big asset, no turnover. Assets is not converted into sales. No business. Business is all about converting total assets into sales, not only what do you call working assets, current assets. Entire thing. If you have a machine, machine should run. Now, you know that aircraft. Aircraft is profitable only when it is in air. Now, during the pandemic, what happens? Even the Thai Airways went into bankrupt. Now they are trying to pick it up back again. Why? They had borrowed heavily. Our airline is, you don't have to talk about that one, of course, that was in trouble so many years after the exit from Emirates. Okay. Thai Airways has borrowed money excessively. And the moment they dropped the sales, they went into bankrupt. Fortunately, the government intervened and secured. But look at Singapore Airlines. Their reserves are very heavy. So they don't. And all the rich companies survived during the COVID period because they had reserves, equity in a simple form. What has happened to our country? We were depending on the running cash flow only. The moment that running cash flow stops, like the sales, what happens? You are in trouble because we are financially leveraged as a country. We had borrowed heavily. Now, our problem is not the cash flow issue, the burden of debts repayment is close up to 7 billion, whereas our reserves are only 2.5 billion. The reserves are not sufficient to pay the debts, so you have to find money. So, the next question is borrow further. Then what happens? Further leverage increases. Similar in businesses. We are not a good country. Why? We are not export oriented. We were not having a better reserve. Now, if you take uh, India, being a large country, they have, I think, close up to 600 billion US dollars as a reserve. 600 billion. Whereas ours is only 2.5 billion. Good countries have good strategies. You need to be an export oriented country. And then only you can build reserves. As a personal, you should have reserves. When there is an emergency, contingency, you should have some reserve funds. Otherwise, then what happens is you need to further borrow. Having borrowed for right now, when you accumulate further borrowing, what happens? Your commitments are going to be huge. And but your income is not sufficient to cover it up. Then obviously final answer is bankruptcy. No issue at all. Okay. In project financing, you need to be very careful debt equity ratio. That's the signal or rather conclusion of this one. What's the date? When I get a proposal, of course, investment proposal, I start only with 60-40 basis. 60 from our side, 40 basis from your side. Provided the project. Provided the project is less risky. we can increase our component from 60 to 70 or 75. But in housing loans, I know that bank loan is 75%. They are small things. No? But when it comes to a large project, make sure that the sponsor's commitment is equally important to ensure the risk is minimized. Otherwise, there should be other ways of mitigating the risks. So this is what we discussed. The other one is when you look at the balance sheet, the liability side, you can look at the financial leverage. And when you look at the asset side, operating leverage. What is operating leverage? Operating leverage, when you have large amount of operating cost, then operating leverage is why. If you take a hotel, whether you run it or not, there's a fixed amount of cost. There's operating leverage is very high. But when you take supermarkets, the entire building is rented out, okay, and only the matter of furniture and equipments. A large amount of stocks, their operating leverage is very low. Okay, when there's operating leverage is very high, the moment you stop sales, you are in trouble. So to look at it very carefully, you can work out the cash break-even analysis. I will be doing later in the course. Cash break-even analysis. What is the point that we can recover the fixed cost? How much of sales we need to generate at least to recover the fixed cost, because fixed cost is going to be fixed. The entrepreneur or the business need to recover it somehow rather. That is one of the issues in business, because when we all are employed, whether we go to work or not, of course we have enough leaves, and then our cash flow is there. But in business it doesn't happen. Business need to convert the assets into sales every time. Now these days, of course, these people are crazy because they need diesel, fuel. Fuel is a input to run the business. Okay, I saw that the supermarket fellows are running here and there because during the power cuts, of course, they need to run with the generators. When I went to supermarkets, of course, they are running with low capacities. Even the AC is not into full capacity. That hurts them because there are refrigerators. Whether you like it or not, of course, you have to run day night. These are fixed costs. When a business has large amount of fixed cost, their operating leverage is very high. So final conclusion, what is it? Operating leverage lies on the asset column. Financial leverage lies on the liability column. So you need to mix with that. In projects, financial leverage also very high. Operating leverage also very high. That's one of the key that you need to take care of in project financing. For the sponsors in a project can be industrial sponsors. Give me a second. Public sponsors, the government, contractors, purely financial investors even. So basically what you look is the combination of all these things. But today you don't see that much of public sponsors. That I will show you how the public is coming into sponsor the businesses, projects. And contractors also coming, like Access, if you take Maga, and they also sponsor during the construction period because they are very healthy fellows. If you look at in our country, Sanken is a good healthy company. Maga is good, and they have some credentials. Access is really good. They also sponsor the project during the construction period. Alternatives, corporate financing as discussed, and ideally you should incorporate a new project from the balance sheet or as a off balance sheet as an SPV, which I discussed already. Why it is important? It's self-explained. Development of industrial facilities required infrastructure, roads, irrigation, water projects, airports, harbors, toll roads, big buildings, flyways. Okay. Development of mega business activities. Now this water park project is a business activity for which Altair building, or what you see, Colombo City Center, for which of course they have borrowed from business banks. And then what else? Okay. Lotus Tower is from another country's fund. Ideally import substitution, solar is one of the things that I'm talking about, energy projects. So thermal oil importation can be curtailed if you develop renewable energy in Sri Lanka. It has to be a kind of a strategic intervention. Export promotion, definitely. We need to develop more and more exports. Like we are just sending raw materials. Food and beverage should be converted into industrial projects. Food and beverage should not come under the category of agriculture projects. That should come under the classification in customs. That should come under HS code should be industrial produce, the vegetables and the fruits, canned products can be exported now. And ideally use now you local raw material. The classic example is organic fertilizer. අර මොනවද තියෙන්නේ මේ කද්දර සල්විනියා වගේ එකක් වැවෙන්න ගත්තේ හොගාලා. That is there is a demand for it. If you look at organic fertilizer, you don't have to import any damn thing. Entire thing is available in the country. The problem is attitudes of people. Now these fellows are crazy. Now you know, if you take statistics, now last Kanne season, at least 30 to 35% have been cultivated with organic fertilizer. Rest out of the rest, at least 20% with nothing, just cultivated. The rest is coming from the synthetic fertilizer. So we can change this one. Who should get motivated? Agriculture department first. They are the people who are really cursing. Sorry to say this one. So employment creation, contribution to the GDP, promote innovations, HR development. We should come up with our local brands. You know, the China in 1977 had liberalization policies. Of course, to a certain extent, they promoted clone products. What do you call clone products? They imitate the products and send it across to the national market, international markets. But right now, what they do is they develop their own brands and send it across. Okay, recently they introduced MG car. MG is a brand coming from UK, whereas they got the license to manufacture in China and say, those are strategies to develop their own brand. Now, in time to come, the MG is no more coming from Western countries. It will only come from China because they have the capacity of produce goods to different markets. Japan also did the same thing. They will produce the same original product to different market because when you take our per capita income is very low now, less than $4,000. Even if you go to Thailand, there is more than $15,000. So you can't buy things from Thailand if you want to, good things. Because simply because these our people are going there, there's a separate market for us. That's a cheap one. That's cheap quality even, not good quality. So development of cross-border transactions, because we should be export-oriented country, more and more export-oriented country rather than import-orientation. So if you look at very carefully, I'm not going after this government, but if you just look at the economic policy framework of the government, which is available online, everything is in line with that. So it is just a matter of implementation. Free market. You know that we should allow individuals to promote more and more project financing. Okay. So the government is encouraging private-public partnerships. Like government will allocate lands because the government doesn't have money. Only thing the government land is available and invite people to come and develop projects. That's good. Now recently, I don't know, along with the hospital road near, what do you call, Parliament, Grand Imperial, that big, what do you call, banquet hall was open with 7 restaurants. I know him personally. And that is a PPP, like I mean, it's not a PPP, by the way, I'm sorry that, but anyway, the government has leased out the property to a private party to develop that one. Simple. It's almost like a PPP. Innovation and entrepreneurship is incentivized and encouraged. Foreign direct investments are allowed to come here and do some projects. Port City is one classic example, without which, of course, we don't have the technology even in certain cases. Of course, we have to bring them in and couple with our local entrepreneurs and develop some projects. So above situation leads to develop modes of project financing in free markets. Capital markets are active in equity financing. Financial institutions are active in debt financing. public-private partnership, that's build, own, operate, and transfer, which is quite good. Build, own, operate, and transfer. Okay. Role of investment banks and venture capital. Unfortunately, we don't have that much of investment and venture capital banks in Sri Lanka. High net worth individual participant like Ms. Dhammika Perra and various other people. There are some unknown names even. Donor agencies, but I don't believe in donor agencies, but I would like to see that bilateral banks which comes on commercial orientation, commercial interest rates. So just to get an start for the next session only, that I have put this slide over here, project financing appraisal. So project financing and project appraisals are two sides of the same coin. Project financing deals with how one would finance projects. Project finance appraisal focus on how does one evaluate the projects to know which projects are worthy of financing. Okay. The promoter's view is vice versa, the lender's view. Project financing means financing an investment based on the operating cash flows and assets, generally without with guarantees or the collateral uh, of the promoters. So in it, of course, we need to go by the cash flows. And final day, of course, I have an assignment with you how to develop cash flows of the project. And during the sessions also, I will be coming with a lot of inputs. And so without wasting much on this one, of course, I will end the session today at this point, and I urge you back again to discuss with Kalinga how best that we can promote physical classes, because for the next session of the diploma courses, the physical classes will be in-housed. The gravity of not having physical classes, because when you look at the results of the exam, not happy, and people are not properly doing the exams, and the teachers are not being able to properly deliver the lectures even, because we need the board and the presence of yours, and also the interactions with the lot of case studies are coming up. Please discuss with Kalinga. I am really happy to come over there and do the lectures. Today even I am at home. Why should I go there for online lecture? That is what I felt, of course. If I went there, of course, I could have used the board, but I don't have the energy to do it. Any other questions before I conclude?
So can you explain again what operational leverage is?
Operation leverage is all about, now you can Google and see exactly how to calculate it. It is a very comprehensive formula. Operating leverage is when the fixed assets are more. Okay, when the current assets are low, then the operating leverage is very high. Take an example of a hotel. Okay, so when there is a hotel, there is a big asset. For a hotel, you don't need that much of variable assets like the stocks and debtors. Debtors may be there, but stocks are very less. They will keep raw material for at least 1 week time in a hotel. Otherwise, it is perishable. No. So, but there is a hotel which requires a lot of maintenance cost, which we call the fixed cost. Housekeeping matters and the lightings, and maybe insurance, maybe bank loans. So when they have a large amount of assets, fixed cost is very high. So that is where you calculate the break-even point. At least the point that at least I can recover the fixed cost. Okay. So operating leverage is all about, and also there are companies where there are no fixed cost. Like some of the banks, they don't have head office billing even. All the buildings are rented out. But they have variable assets, loan and advances. Okay, banks operating leverage is very low, financial leverage very high. If you just look at the bank's financial leverage, more than 15 times sometimes. Crazy, because banks are running with somebody else's money. Banks never fund their own money, otherwise very costly. That is why the regulator is coming up. Hey, you have to at least maintain capital adequacy ratio. That is not there in the other companies. No, why? The banks are depending on depositors' money. Not like in private sector organizations. Private sector what has done is they have borrowed from banks and they have put their equity. Their leverage is quite low, whereas in banks, high leverage, financial leverage, and operating leverage is very low. Bank business is not promoting buildings. Bank business is loans and advances and getting the customers into the bank. Any other questions?
You have mentioned about one video which is uploaded to YouTube regarding this development bank skilling. What is it?
Yeah. Type Professor Nicholas Howard. Associate
Okay,
Professor Nicholas Howard.
okay, sir. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, looks there are no questions. And also you can comment on my way of presenting and the language or whatever it is. Of course, I can tailor-made to you. My intention is to ensure that you understand something another day, otherwise the purpose is lost. Okay, and also remember there is an exam, 70% which carries, so you have to get through the exam. And I can't bring down the standard of the paper because there is a minimum requirement. So therefore, please actively participate in the class by asking questions. Put me into trouble, no problem. I am not a genius to answer all of your questions, but at least next day I will try to answer you. Okay, thank you very much and all the best.
Thank you, sir.